Welcome to the Teacher's Lounge. Today we are with Mrs. Quinn, teacher at Keystone Academy, and we are talking about making reading fun for the students that are in your classroom. So thank you, Mrs. Quinn, for joining us. The reason I wanted to have you on is I think reading in general can be something that's difficult to get students excited about, but you are doing some pretty cool things in your classroom, student-led book clubs, getting kids excited, independent reading. What is the thing about reading with your students that you think excites them the most?
I think when students can find a book that they like see themselves in or relate to, that just like immediately grabs their attention, they're so excited about reading, and all of a sudden they're like, "Oh wait, this is super fun, and I should be doing it anyway." Like it helps me with ELA anyway, and it grabs them, and then they're just hooked.
So, what's the bridge from? Because what grade do you teach?
I teach eighth grade.
Okay, so I remember being in eighth grade in the first 7 years of my academic career. I didn't necessarily love reading.
Yeah.
So, when I get to eighth grade, Mrs. Quinn's class, what's the bridge from reading is more of an exercise that I'm not super excited about? I'd rather get to the playground to this is something I really enjoy. How do you bridge that gap from a lot of the reading you've done have been exercise or academic based to now you're going to read for the joy or
Yeah.
a topic that you really enjoy? What's that bridge?
It's really hard. So I'm like glad you asked, because I think this is probably the hardest part of my job and the thing I spend the most time like researching and reading about. Because if you don't like reading, you're not going to be into it. So I have to really do a good job with that bridge. So I think it really starts at the beginning of the year. I um, make well, I do. I make the kids fill out this like reading inventory, and it really is just like a two-page thing that or sheet that ask them a bunch of questions about reading, like how they feel about it and like what they would want to read. And 90% of the time, I get like a bunch of kids that are like, "I hate reading. Reading is the worst. I don't want to read anything." And I'm like, "Cool. Where do we go from there?" So then I start, if a kid gives me like a genuine response that is really interesting and like I have somewhere to go, I can recommend them a book right away. And those are the people who are probably, or students, who are probably already reading. So I don't know I need to like bridge them to that point yet. Like I know they already know how, like they already like reading.
So the sheet that you're having the students fill out,
Yeah,
that is that to identify their interest in reading, to align them with a
yeah,
book that you think that they will enjoy reading?
yeah,
So because that's a pretty interesting kind of exercise to get kids interested in reading. So I know like eighth grade Scott probably would have said, a book on basketball or
yeah.
Michael Jordan or Magic Johnson. So when you're looking through these sheets, are you trying to find a book that matches every student's interests?
Yes, I try to find a book for every single kid based on these sheets.
Where are these books coming from? Are they in the school library? Are they?
Um, well, I have my own personal library I've been collecting and like
Mm.
had with me since I started teaching, like um, I don't know, 4 years ago, and it's over 300 books. So I have them
Wow.
all. Yeah, I have them all in my classroom. I'm like, it's like my pride and joy. Like I love these books. I'm so happy to have them, and they're organized. They're out. There's like posters on the wall suggesting books for kids. So like literally I print out little pictures of the book covers, and if it says like if you like sports, try these books, and I put up
Mm.
like 5 popular books that usually like an eighth grade Scott, like you just
Hmm.
said, would like. um, and honestly, as I keep teaching, I get to know like this kind of, I mean, every kid's different, but these kids kind of fit into these like grooves. I'm like, I know to sort of push this kid towards these books because I think he would relate to it. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And that's what's interesting is this library that you have your own of 300 books. I mean, yeah, there's different interests and
yeah,
likes and hobbies of each kid, but to your point, you probably can steer the vast majority of them
yeah,
to that. Do you have any pushback with students that say, I don't like to read? Is there a way to kind of say, okay,
yeah.
well, I need you to fill this out? And how do you handle
Yep.
that? I hate to read, turning that into, okay, well, what are your hobbies? And then we can kind of
Yeah.
bridge that gap.
So what I do is we do this thing called like speed dating with the book the first week, where I set out like I put kids in groups, and on each table there are like I don't know, 6 or 7 books that were really popular like last year with the kids. So I'm like, okay, these are sort of like in the know with the kids. And then we spend like a minute looking for a book. So they pick a book out of that table. They sit down, they have like 30 seconds to like preview it. And this is all timed, and I like give them
Mhm.
directions. And then they spend a minute just like reading the first page. Not allowed to stop reading. They have to give the book a shot for a minute, and then they put it down, and then they have a list, like a to be read next list, and they can add it onto their list for the year. So it like gives them a snippet of a book, and this helps some of the kids. Doesn't help all of them, but it helps like the next group that says they don't like reading. They are able to see like, oh, I do kind of like that book, or I do kind of like that one. I'm interested in that, so they have somewhere to go.
And that's why I think I was the most excited to talk to you about how you're getting kids reading. It's not just a simple,
So
here's, whatever eighth grade book you're supposed to read, Huckleberry and Finn or the Scarlet Letter or whatever grade is, or whatever book is associated with the eighth grade, and say, okay, let's get excited about reading this book. But you're
yeah.
kind of going above and beyond with this sheet of interest in books, with the speed dating of reading. How long have you been doing these exercises to pair kids up with books that they're already going to find interested in?
I every year I kind of like add something onto it. So
Mhm.
every year I kind of like find something else. I'm like, oh, that worked. I'm gonna do that next year. I think that. So I tweak it every year at the beginning of the year, because the beginning of the year is really the time to do it. So I guess like when I first started teaching in Michigan, and I first realized like how important independent reading was. Um, I started with just making kids read an independent book every day for 10 minutes. And that did not go over well, because I was like, some of these kids don't like reading. I can't just make them read. They're just gonna sit there.
And what was the book you were making them read for 10 minutes?
I just let them pick whatever book they wanted.
Okay.
I was like, you have to have any book. It can be the book we're reading in class if you want to read that for 10 minutes, which was a bad idea too. I shouldn't have done that. But I let them pick whatever they wanted, and some of them did it and did well, but a lot of them didn't, because they just didn't have that like structure there already for enjoying reading, or like knowing what books they wanted to read.
And that 10-minute free read probably felt like an assignment like they've been doing their whole life. Whereas the speed dating, the worksheet of their interest probably feels more like, I don't want to call it free time, but it's an activity that they're enjoying while still learning at the same
Yeah.
time. Like I remember back to eighth grade Scott, I could read a book on Derek Jeter for, I could read the whole book in a day. But if you wanted
Hmm.
me to read a book that my English teacher told me, it was like trying to sludge through this thing
No.
is, and that's the thing I think that I appreciate the most about your classroom is you just want your kids to read. You want
Yep.
them to be excited about, yes, there's things you have to cover, but just the joy of reading is top of mind. So when you started these exercises, did you notice a stark difference in the attitudes of kids towards reading or towards books or test scores or anything like that? Or was it just they were excited to read?
Um, it kind of depends on the group of kids too, and like how the year's going. But I have noticed that like at the beginning of the year, especially when it's new to them, that like, okay, my teacher is going to make me read for 20 minutes every day. I have to do this every day, because now it is 20 minutes that I do it. They realize like, okay, she's actually going to do this. It's not going to be like we do this every once in a while and I have to pretend to read. We're doing this every day. So I have to actually do it. And so the kids who like reading already are like excited about it, and that kind of spreads to the other kids. So the
Mm.
other kids start to get excited, and then by like Thanksgiving, everybody's like coming in. They're like, okay, can we have more than 20 minutes to read today? I'm so excited. I want to read for 30 minutes. And they find
Wow.
it's like, yeah, it's like this really centering activity that like calms them before English class, and it gives them like they get to pick what they're doing, because they pick their book,
Mm.
and that's all eighth graders want, is to have choice in what they're doing. So it gives them that like autonomy too. And yeah, I just got really excited, so I feel like I just
And there's a lot to be said, especially for that age group of eighth grade. They're probably starting, or maybe they're already in this. They're involved in TikTok, social
oh yeah.
media, iPads, computers, YouTube, TV. So getting them kind of off this screen time just to read, just to be an eighth
Mhm.
grade kid again, that's super exciting to kind of hear the
Yeah.
process behind that. Um, It's funny you mentioned the fake reading because I was one of
Yeah.
those kids where
No, I can totally tell when
read
kids
for
fake
10
read.
minutes. And I
Yeah.
think I put more effort in pretending I was reading than it would have
Yes.
taken to actually read the stupid book. But
Yep. That's what I say to them. I'm like, hey, I can tell you're fake reading. Wouldn't it just be easier to find a book you like, and maybe it would be more fun if you just liked it? So, yeah.
and kind of taking this a step further than just the reading and getting your kids engaged in reading, you do a student-led book club too, right?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, it's a student-led book club. It's great.
How long have you been doing that?
I started it last, oh my gosh, right before the pandemic started. I would say probably like January.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
for a year.
what was the thought process behind that?
I noticed that some kids were like, a lot of kids struggle, and it's something I still teach a lot, like how to find the right book. And it's something that a lot of kids still need help with. And so I'm constantly teaching that. And a lot of kids like will finish a book and they'll be like, Miss Quinn, I just want to tell you all about this book. And they'll sit down and they'll want to talk to me about it. And then they'll try and talk to their friends about it. And their friend will be like, I didn't read that. I don't care. And so I saw this like need for kids to like discuss something um and benefit from like having a book sort of like um, not selected for them, but that they voted on, that a group voted
Hmm.
on, and they kind of like had to read, but they wanted to read at the same time, and then like room for that like discussion about it.
So a book club is it's something that I think a lot of people are interested in. I've talked to other teachers that have tried it and
Yeah.
couldn't get any traction with it. How is that? Okay, you come up with this idea. How do you put
Mhm.
this into practice? How do you get
Yeah,
kids excited about joining this?
it's really hard, and like I'm still working on it. And there are kids who are really excited about it, but it's not as big as I want it to be. So
Hmm.
I um, it was a lot easier when we were in person because I could like sort of go talk to kids about it and get them excited and get other kids who were in it to go talk to their friends about it. And it was sort of like word of mouth last year when we were in person. And that's when it probably had the most members because kids were just able to say like, yeah, we're reading it for Miss Quinn's book club, like, or we're reading it for a book club. Come read it. It's super fun. Um, Now it's harder. I have to like actively send out like not fly like basically a flyer that I make that advertises it. I have a website I update. They have a Google Classroom where they can discuss it. It's just a lot more moving parts to keep it going when we're not in person. But it works.
How many kids did you have in it?
Oh, I probably had like 20 to start.
Wow. Were they
Yeah.
all your students?
No, so last year was sixth, seventh, and eighth grade. So a lot of it was probably about half sixth grade, half seventh and eighth grade last year. And then I sort of found that the maturity level between a sixth grader and a seventh and eighth grader is like pretty big in what they want to read. So like the sixth graders would be like, I want to read this, and the eighth graders would be like, I'm not reading that. Like that's not cool enough. So I kind of just focused on seventh and eighth grade for this school year. And I have like a handful of kids that'll come in and out, and it's going. And I have some really active members, and then I have some members who just kind of want to do 1 month and they want to skip the next month, but it's getting better this year.
I I've had a couple teachers tell me that they want to start a book club or they tried and it failed.
Yeah.
When do you do the book club? Is it during the school days? Is it after school? Is it at lunch?
Yeah, so it started at lunch, which was really nice because the kids were at school and they got to like do something fun for lunch. And um, we like had food cater. I got food for the kids that went with the book, so it was kind of fun because it like if you read the book, you got why we were eating popcorn or something. It was fun. And then when we went virtual, we kind of changed it to after school
Hmm.
because some of well, actually, my school was hybrid. No, it was fully in person and fully virtual. So my virtual kids could do it at lunch, but it was just hard to combine the kids who were physically there with the kids who were virtual. So I ended up making it fully virtual through Google Meet at like 4 o'clock, so everybody could go home and get on their computers in time. And that's sort of how we're doing it now.
And I mean, with 20 kids in there with three different ages
Oh
or
yeah.
three different age groups, I would assume that all these kids are very engaged.
Yeah, they were super
Like,
engaged. I remember for the first meeting, I like planned all this stuff. I was like, oh my gosh, what if they're bored? Or like, what if I don't provide enough like engaging, fun games for them to play? Because I always made a game that went with the book too. And the first meeting, we didn't even play the game. They were all just talking about it on their own. So it was so cool to see because it was really like the kids wanted to do it, and I didn't
Yeah.
have to do very much.
And that's got to be such a cool feeling because student engagement is such a, I mean, it weighs so heavily on most teachers that,
Yeah.
these kids, reading isn't, it's like eating your vegetables. You have to do it, but it's not always the most enjoyable. But to have these kids in here doing it and then being super engaged, that's got to be a cool feeling.
Yeah, it's super rewarding, and I think that's why it's my favorite part of my job sometimes, because I don't know, I have like, I'll get like 75% of my class engaged on a good day, but it's really hard to get everybody engaged all the time, especially virtually, which is a real challenge. But with book club, it was like these kids were like, I just want to do this, and it was through nothing. I had really, I guess I made book club, so I guess I did that, but it wasn't like found some crazy new way to engage kids. It was just like, hey, let's all read a book and talk about it. So it was fun.
Hmm. That's cool because, you know, reading, I think, especially with the advent of technology and social media and all of these other, you know, kids now can put on a headset and you're in a different world walking on a volcano with
Yeah,
VR headsets. So to get kids excited about reading, I think, I don't want to say, it's harder today than it ever has been, but, there's a lot more distractions right now. So the fact that these kids are excited, whether that is in the book club or in the independent reading, that I think speaks very highly of, the efforts you put into reading in your classroom. So that's cool to see. So you get your students, you ensure that they're reading a book on their own of something that they're interested in. How do you make sure that they're following through, that they are enjoying the book, that they're engaged, and they're not just eighth
yeah.
grade Scott fake reading through this?
Excellent question. So first of all, I do like a check-in every day with the kids. When
Mm.
they come in, they tell me what page they're on, and then I compare it to what page they were on yesterday. So I literally have those numbers and that math. I could be like, oh, so you read one page in class yesterday for 20 minutes, and it ends like some kids will try it the first week and then they'll stop because they realize I'm gonna call them out on it. But the real thing that works is I have a weekly conference with every kid. So every kid
Mm.
I like assign a different day because I like to be very organized. I'm like, these groups I talk to these kids on Monday, these kids on Tuesday. Um, During that 20 minutes of reading, I pull them back to the back table. So I take a little bit of their reading time and um, we talk about what they're reading, how they like the book. So like literally they'll have like a mini conference with me about the book, whether they like it or not. And I kind of ask them like what's going on in the book. And I can tell based on how far they are in the book and what they say about what's going on, if they're actually reading and if they're understanding it. Um, and it's sort of a way for me to gauge like, okay, do we need to drop down a reading level? Could we move up? Are we going to stay with this book for a little bit, or do we need to let it go and find a new one? Yeah,
So these weekly meetings with your students, sole purpose, not to see if you can catch them lying about reading,
no,
but it is to truly find out if they're engaged in the book.
yes, 100%. And it's like to see if they get it, because a lot of kids will be like, yeah, I totally get it. It's good. Awesome. And I'll be like, okay, well, we got to talk about it more than that, because you could just be telling me that. And I don't want you to waste like a month reading this book and not truly understand like the comprehension level. Like that's a waste of my time and yours. So like if we need to let the book go, drop down a reading level, try something else for a little bit, we're going to do it right now. I don't want to waste like another day.
These weekly meetings where you're asking them, are they enjoying the book? What are they learning? All of these questions. Is that another activity of student engagement?
Yeah. It's another way for me to like, first of all, kids are more engaged like if everybody is, if they know they have to be. So if
Hmm.
I'm gonna like literally be like, okay, that's not enough, please clarify or please elaborate on that during our meetings, they're forced to be more engaged because they know it's coming. Now, I don't want them to be forced. I want it to like naturally occur. So what
Yeah.
usually happens is I usually end up like building a better relationship with these kids where they feel more comfortable with me and I feel more comfortable with them because I'm dedicating 5 minutes a week just talking to them. So they feel more comfortable sharing with me.
I mean, there are entire books and seminars and videos all dedicated to creating relationships with students. We've done a podcast on how to
Yeah.
create relationships with students. Something as small as that, where you're giving them the opportunity to find a book to read that they enjoy and
Hmm.
then checking in with them, not a progress report, not,
No.
give me a verbal vomit of what's going on in chapter 3. So I know
Yeah.
that you are reading this, not trying to catch them, but just simply asking if they like it. What do they like? What do they not like?
Yeah.
That works. That is so cool on so many levels. It's letting them know that you're interested in what they have to say. You're
Yeah.
learning about them. Like that's a cool kind of bookend to
Yeah.
this independent reading of you're you're learning about them, you're taking an interest in them. And it's
Hmm.
something that I would imagine as an 8th grader that they're probably very proud to tell their teacher,
Yeah.
this is what's going on. This is why I like it.
Yeah, they get so excited. And when they finish a book, they're like, Miss Quinn, I finally finished this book. I'm like, great. I'm going to move your conference to today and we'll move theirs tomorrow because I know you want to talk about it right now. And they're like, good, because I can't wait. And I'm like, great. So let's talk about it. And I, it also builds, like, there's a speaking and listening aspect of ELA where kids learn how to like articulate and present
Mm,
in front of people. So it's also building that skill. Like they're talking to me literally about something they comprehended. So they're taking what they comprehended and they're learning how to say it and articulate it and explain what they liked, what they didn't like, what they're struggling with. And it's amazing how hard it is for them at the beginning of the year, one-on-one,
mm.
to how easy it gets for them at the end of the
So they're like little weekly book reports.
year. Yep, they're little weekly book reports.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
So you have the exercises to get kids engaged and interested in reading books with your 2-page kind of interest letter. You have the student-led book club, the speed dating for books. But I guess my next question would be, how are you getting kids engaged with the books that you have to read? That,
That's a really
the
good
8th
question.
grade, whether that's state testing or the syllabus or the school has identified as these kids need to read this and they will be tested on that. How do you make that engaging for students?
Very good question. So it's hard. I try to start out by, so I guess a lot of what I've read and researched on this has sort of pointed to the fact that like the more kids are literally reading books, the more comfortable, even if it's an independent reading book, the more comfortable
Mm,
they are reading a text for class that might not be of their particular interest level. So like we just read a nonfiction book. It's called Chew on This. It's really good. It's all about how fast food is terrible for you.
mm.
But 8th graders hate reading nonfiction. They just do. Um, so it's hard to start the year with something like that. And I think I really focused on getting my kids like just to be like used to reading again, even if it's like their independent reading books before we started our class novel or our class book. Um, and that helps a little bit. Another thing is just really like building that reading stamina. So like if we read
Mm.
for 20 minutes, even if it's something they like, they are reading. So they are practicing reading something with their brains, staying engaged for 20 minutes. That stamina does um, carry over to when we read something else. Like they've done that for that amount of time. And that helps on state tests a little bit. Um, and it helps with like when we're reading a class novel too. It's not, it doesn't always work. There's a lot of stuff that I could work on with that, but it does help a little bit.
So you're almost using the independent reading and the stuff they really enjoy almost as like a workout, or
Yep.
when you play basketball you do all these dribbling drills to get better at your overall. You're using these independent books to almost work out their desire to read, right?
Yes.
You're whetting the appetite, you're getting the mindset into that point. How important is that, instead of just dropping Moby Dick or War and Peace or
Mhm.
whatever you're reading in 8th grade on their desk and say, read, I need a book report. You're going to be quizzed on this.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought this up because I think this is like the heart of why independent reading matters. Because I think a lot of people look at it and they say, oh, it's great. Reading's wonderful. And it is. And that's great. Everybody should be able to read and everybody should like reading, in my opinion. But it if they read and they read things that are like at their reading level, and the longer they read at that reading level, their vocabulary is going to grow. So their
Mm,
exposure to words grows over time, which helps them like do better on tests, like be able to read other books. So it's sort of like, and it like scaffolds them for the real deal, basically,
mm,
which is on the tests and the class novels, and the more they see like writing in front of them, like their independent dear books, writing that is like well done and well structured and well organized, the more likely they are to be able to replicate that in their own
mm.
writing or on tests, because the more time they spend with that, they don't realize it, but they're working on a lot of other ELA skills that I explicitly teach as well. Um,
There's a
yeah,
lot of truth in that because eighth grade, you're obviously still growing, your brain's still growing, you're still learning. So to just drop a book on a kid's desk and say,
yeah,
read, this is what we have to do. But you are, through their hobbies and interests, building their level of, like you said, reading, vocabulary,
mhm,
just getting them to the point. Because I would imagine there are kids in your, maybe not necessarily your class, but there's kids in every classroom that, whether it's, their home life, their environment, maybe they didn't pay attention last year, but the state testing or the syllabus or the classroom requirements just aren't ready for that. And reading
no,
is something, it's a lot like math where to your point, it compounds on itself. So that's something I'd never even thought of, about the independent reading gets them ready
yeah,
to read what they're supposed to read.
yeah, exactly. And that's the coolest part about it, because like even though they're supposed to be at like an eighth grade reading level, and even though the next book we're reading together is an eighth grade reading level, a lot of these kids don't read at an eighth grade reading level,
Mm,
and so a lot of their independent reading books are at a fifth grade level. Some of them are at a third grade level, but the interest level of the topic is at an eighth grade level. So it's like
mm.
the vocabulary is lower, but the interest level is something they're engaged with. So they're spending time reading that at that level, to over time where it grows over, if we read 20 minutes in class every day at that level, it's going to grow by the end of the year.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool because it actually increases their reading level.
Yeah, I mean, most people, I think if you said walk outside and run a mile, probably
Yeah,
wouldn't be able to. But if you ran, 300 yards every day, all of a sudden it's not that big of a deal to run a mile. Um,
exactly.
how much of this, the independent reading, the building on top of each other, expanding the vocabulary, the power of reading, how much of that do you think influences like writing ability or comprehension or some of these other topics that,
Yeah.
I don't want to say reading is a cure all, but it's kind of broadening the entire, it's really educating the whole student, for lack of a better
Yep.
term, is allowing them to grow in other areas. How important is reading to those other aspects?
From what I've researched and from what I've read, it's like crucial for other
Mm,
things. And it's like the easiest way to access all of those different skills that they need to learn for ELA with like one activity. So
mm.
the challenging thing about ELA is you need to teach grammar, you need to teach comprehension, you need to teach writing, um, you need to teach vocabulary. And that's, if you separate all those into little lessons,
Yeah.
which is fine. I've done it before, it works. It's just a lot more challenging as a teacher. But if you're reading, and that's why there are whole class novels. That's the idea behind it, that we're all reading the book, we're learning all these skills together. But if you compound that with also like, hey, you're reading 20 minutes on your own every day, it sort of like reinforces that even more. So I mean, from what I've read and from what research I've read,
Mm.
it really does. The more time kids spend reading independent books that they're interested in and that they chose, the higher their vocabulary is, the better like their comprehension is.
You've referenced a lot of some of the research you've done that's helped kind of guide some of the activities you do in your class to inspire a lot of these reading activities and books you've read. Is there one that sticks out to you that has helped a lot in this aspect?
Yeah, for sure. I read the book. It's called The Book Whisperer by Donald Miller. I mean, it's right here. You can see all the crazy tabs in it too. Um, I read it I actually bought it from one of the school book fairs when I first started working at NHA. And I was like, oh, I'm going to spend my money because PTO gives us some money. I was like, I'm gonna buy this book because it looks really
Yeah.
good. I've heard about it, read it in like, I don't know, a week. And I was like, I relate to this. I relate to this. Oh, this is such a great idea. Never thought about it this way. There are ideas that are practical. Like it gave me a lot of practical resources, like the book, like the interest form I talked about at the beginning.
Mm.
I got from this book. It's a PDF that is free online. It's from this book. Um, it's also really applicable to like all grade levels. So like whether you're teaching
Mm.
kindergarten or high school, there's something in there you can do. And everything has like research backing it. So if you're like a person who's like, well, why does this work? There's some good research in there too. Yeah.
Is this a book you knew about beforehand, or you just kind of stumbled across the gem?
I knew that I wanted to read it. I've always I always read education books for fun, just not for fun, to like help me get better and stuff. I guess it's for fun for me because I'm weird. I'm always doing research on like what I can do better. So I find books or I find articles, and this was one that was on my list, and I was like, oh, it's here, I can get it. So,
Hmm. Is that something you would tell other teachers to scoop up and kind of
yes.
leaf through to kind of help guide in
Yeah,
their
I
own
think
classroom?
it's like a quick read, honestly, in terms of like teaching books, and it has like literally every page there's something that you can like actually do in your classroom that day. So it's less like theory based and more like practical
Hmm.
applications too. To read a lot, their writing is instantly better.
And that's, I think, the coolest thing that you've done in your classroom is it grows all of these skills. So to grow those skills, you give them things that they're interested in reading.
Yep.
That I think is probably the coolest thing. With with your hobby list, with the speed dating,
Yeah.
it's really aligning them with not necessarily just go pick out a book on a bookshelf and
Yeah.
maybe I'll like it, maybe I won't. I have to read for 20 minutes, whatever.
Yeah.
But getting them something where they are actually engaged in the topic, I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, and if you're engaged, you're a lot more likely to learn. So, I mean, and that's what we try to do every day when I teach grammar. Like, I don't know how to engage kids in grammar. It's really hard. You're either into it or you're not, and it's hard work. But if you're engaged in what you're reading, the topic, then I'm like tricking you into learning. So,
So if you had to go back to Mrs. Quinn on her first day of teaching, or
mhm,
if you had to give some advice to an ELA teacher out there listening that wants to incorporate more independent reading or encouraging students to love their reading, what
yeah,
would you tell them?
oh, that's so hard. I would say get to know your students because if you don't know your students, you can't recommend them books. And if you can't recommend them books, they're going to be at a loss with like, they're going to say, I don't know what book to read, so I'm not going to get anything out of this 20 minutes. So if you don't know your students, if you don't take the time to like meet with them about what they're reading and get feedback on the book and how easy or hard it was to read, you're not going to be able to match them with a good book or help them find that independent reading book. So I think getting to know them is I mean, as most teachers know, it's the most important part of teaching, I think. Um, and it leads to the most success with reading.
Well, thank you, Mrs. Quinn. This was very helpful.
Yeah.
Reading is something I think that, we hit on of it can improve a lot of areas of the student, and
Mhm.
an area that not a lot of students, especially middle school kids, are excited to do. So
Yeah.
I think this is a topic that's very important, and I think you provided a lot of um, activities and opportunities for other teachers to kind of grow in this area. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I'm just really excited to talk about it.
Boom.